Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the AnthroPuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letzinger, and every 2 weeks we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we're pleased to welcome Eleanor Snowden. Ellie holds a master's in anthropology of development and social transformation with a specialization in medical anthropology from the University of Sussex, as well as a bachelor's in anthropology. She is currently a senior research consultant and health program lead at the Cynefin Company, also known as Cognitive Edge, in England, where she applies her expertise to complex health and social issues. How are we doing today, Ellie?
I am great. Lovely to be with you, Abby.
Yeah, so what is a senior research consultant and health program lead?
So as a research consultant, well, maybe I'll tell you a little bit about my organization first, actually, to give a little bit of context. Excellent pronunciation. So I work for quite a small organization. I call us small but globally placed. So we're called the Cynefin Company. Cynefin. It's actually a Welsh word and it translates to my place of multiple belongings, which is beautifully poetic and slightly ambiguous. But actually, in preparation for this podcast, I kind of traced the term because I wanted to understand where it came from. And apparently, and this is very anthropological, it actually comes or was first used to describe the paths that livestock create over time. So that kind of creation of directions of travel over a period, which I love. So side quests aside, Cynefin Company, we're quite small. We're mainly female run. We are an organization that specializes in complexity science. And specifically, we have a series of methods and tools where we apply some of the principles of complexity, anthropology, neuroscience into practice. So leaping back to your question in terms of my role in relation to all of this, I work more in the kind of research side of things. And so I, in particular, support our clients to learn how to use our methods and tools. And I can talk a little bit more to them in a moment. So a lot of training, a lot of learning, a lot of doing the research, more often than not in collaboration. There's a kind of really big theme that underpins a lot of our work at Cynefin, which is that of narrative and story. And specifically, the phrase that we use is multi-perspective narrative, which again, for me, is very anthropological. And anthropology, as you kind of would be aware, is all about the kind of art, science, getting things wrong of telling stories, telling other people's stories, often unsuccessfully. And a lot of the work that we do is to try and unearth some of the maybe more hidden stories that might be going on in any particular context, any time and place. Kind of small stories, the stories that we might share through our everyday conversations quite organically or naturally without being overly prompted. So the types of like anecdotal evidence an anthropologist might be seeking when she goes out into the field doing participant observation. So my kind of speciality in this organization is a tool called SenseMaker, which I love. We can kind of easily call this a story survey. Kind of key idea behind this is that we ask people to share a story from their lived experience, and there's different ways that will prompt them into that. And then whereas kind of in a typical survey, you might get all these Likert scale style questions, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 10, from this story that someone has shared, we then ask them a series of questions on a kind of quantitative lens where they themselves are interpreting the meaning of their own story. So instead of a researcher, instead of an analyst, instead of an expert in inverted commas, it's this idea that, the storyteller, the story sharer should be the first person to say what that story means. And at the same time, when we do these story surveys and these story collections, we try our best to not limit the types of stories to one type of person. So we try and take the angle of as many perspectives as possible to get a kind of richer picture around what might be going on around a particular objective or aim. And by doing this, we have several points of departure because we have the idea that one person's telling their story, they're telling us what that means in a quantitative space. And then by bringing all of this together, we can get kind of collective patterns and we can reveal maybe some of the different ways that we're interpreting our experiences and experiences of others and how those kind of biases themselves might be weaving their ways in helpful and unhelpful ways.
So why is this kind of work important?
I think for me, there's a phrase that my colleague often use, which is what's normal to the spider is chaos to the fly, right? If you're creating the systems, structures, processes, societally, culturally, otherwise, then you have a sense of how they work, how they operate, and it's easier to navigate them. If you're new to that, your sense and your experience is going to be, very different and potentially quite alienating. And I work with a lot of kind of leaders, change makers, and people who are really looking to make a difference in the world. And often the people that come to us have this humility that we might be creating these spaces, but we don't know necessarily how they're going to work and for whom. So I think for me, it's important in this act of revealing some of our more taken for granted assumptions and values, which of course, again, is just inherent to the kind of anthropological skill set and probably what brings us all into this place.
Yeah. And you had mentioned anecdotal evidence. Can you kind of explain what that means?
Mm. So I think, my background looking at anthropology and anthropology of the development industry in particular, I have a real keen interest in kind of the politics of knowledge production. What counts as evidence? Who decides what that means? And especially when we're looking at a kind of medical anthropological lens, we have certain kind of regimes of value or logics of value that become more normalized in certain spaces. So it might be that we have a kind of medicalization of language, for example, and these kind of registers that decide what does and doesn't count as information, as data, as evidence. So there's always decisions that are made in terms of that kind of representation of experience and knowledge in that codification. And I think what we try to do is to create an interactional space between those kind of different types of knowledge. So it's not to say that, a single anecdote is true. It's kind of problematizing that objective, subjective binary that we can get caught in. And it's kind of playing with this idea of, I guess a really nice way of phrasing this doesn't come from me. It comes from, I don't know if you've heard of an Aboriginal activist academic called Tyson Yunkaporta.
No.
He's incredible, based in North Queensland. He talks about this idea of diverse ignorance being that you only analyze something from one point of view. But when we can bring together lots of different ways of analyzing this, modes of interpretation, that's what gives us this kind of richer picture. And that's kind of the better way to do these things.
So, what does your day to day look like in these kind of positions? Does it differ every day, or is it kind of similar in what you do?
There are some similarities and some differences. Differences mainly born from the fact that we're a small organization, which means that you have to wear so many hats. But, there's a lot of emails, there's a lot of Zoom time, a lot of amazing conversations with people, and that's always my favorite part. I'm so lucky in this job because what we do is kind of quite niche, but also quite broadly applicable, which feels like a paradox. And we're very much at this kind of position on the margins, if you like, which, is an interesting place to occupy. But I work with a very diverse range of clients and audiences. So, I could be having conversations with kind of leaders in corporations and commercially driven organizations to kind of local organizations or cooperatives to people in healthcare systems. So there's a lot of kind of diversity in terms of the type of conversations we have. But in terms of kind of day-to-day actions, I might be training people to use our tools, taking them on a little bit of a learning journey. I might be facilitating workshops. A lot of what I do is a kind of participatory approach to doing research. So working with small groups, getting them to share their stories and go through some acts of kind of collective interpretation and seeing what happens, to doing more formal pieces of research where we're contributing to reports that might feed into things like policy recommendations. So yeah, no 2 days look the same.
When you were growing up, did you think this was something that you were going to do, or did you have a whole other idea of where you were going to be at this time and this day and age?
I love that question because, when I was a kid, I feel like the two things I wanted to be were a writer or a doctor. But I hated studying science. Like I loved history and English and sociology. And I didn't want to give up any of them, but none of them felt whole. And as soon as I discovered anthropology, I was like, whoa, this does everything. So I guess in some ways I could, but in some ways I can't. And I still can't even imagine what I might be doing 10 years into the future because, much like you, I like doing a few different things. I do this job now. I also used to be a massage therapist and training to be a yoga teacher. So yeah, it's nice to keep things mixed up.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was like, I'm gonna be a veterinarian. And then I saw how much schooling and science was involved, and I'm like, ooh. No, thank you. I'll just find something else to do. And then when I was in college, I took a really cool class. It was called forensic anthropology. And I'm like, oh, like that sounds really cool. And I was also watching the TV show Bones at the time. So I was like, oh, that's what she does. And then I also realized how much science and schooling was involved. I'm like, oh, a hard pass I get. But I don't think I would have made it through the program anyways because I have a weak stomach. I think I was a senior in high school and I went to this camp for like a week or two, and it was this sports medicine camp. And there was one day after lunch, they showed us these videos of all these different like injuries because you're supposed to know how to like help these people when they get and I'm like, oh no, I'm turning my whole desk around. I can't look at these. So I'm like, okay, so nothing in the medical field. Got it. But how did you get to this career path? Like, what was, because I saw that you got a master's degree in anthropology of development and social transformation. What does all of that mean?
We would always joke in class that that was the longest winded title we'd ever come across. It was called ADST in short. But yeah, so I mean, the course itself, it's nestled within the School for Global Studies. So Sussex University has a really, really thriving. It's called the International Development, so IDS, International Development Studies Centre. And it's such an incredible uni to be at. You know, it's kind of in Brighton near the sea, but also, you know, nestled in this national park. So it's very, very green. And the centre itself, it took a really kind of critically engaged approach to looking at development and humanitarian practices. And so the course itself was kind of bringing together development studies with anthropology to marry those two worlds with this idea of, you know, doing applied anthropology, but really thinking about your positionality. Because of course, you know, a lot of anthropology is the value in combining the kind of emic insider and etic outsider perspectives, not necessarily valuing one over the other, but making sure they're both there, right? And seeing what new things or what might emerge from that. And this course was really all about kind of taking that position in that world of being in and of something. So you can immerse in it, but you can also kind of step back and observe. And again, it's kind of playing with that binary of subjective, objective that anthropology does so well. And I loved that course. And it really, really challenged me so much. And, you know, in my undergrad, I'm not going to lie, I really struggled because like I went straight from, you know, school is so contained in terms of how you learn. And then I was kind of thrown with undiagnosed ADHD as well, added in there, thrown into it. But then the masters was really where it all kind of came together. And it was just a really, really wonderful learning environment there. Some incredible teachers. And just, you know, I've always been very driven by, I hadn't seen it that way. You know, that feeling that you get where you just know something's really opened and you don't know how yet, but it has. And it could just be from a sentence that someone has shared. So yeah, it was a very inspiring course. And actually, I went into public policy research from there that I found it wasn't quite for me. I think like I like to be a little bit outside of the box in terms of the way that I think. And, you know, there's so many different ways to do research. And this particular public policy institute was really, really fascinating in many ways. It really kind of taught me a lot about the politics of knowledge production again in the way that research is done. I did some kind of projects with the UK government in particular that were focused around things like employment support allowance. And, you know, it was really interesting to go from this very rich, critical learning environment, because anthropology is really good at, you know, pointing fingers at things and picking out problems, but not necessarily always having the solutions, which, you know, is a blessing and a curse. But going from that, which in many ways at that age was a little bit idealistic, into the world of public policy research was a real big jump, and it was really interesting. And then Carnarvon, you know, I'm going to be really honest. So I actually, this is a family thing, right? I work with my dad, and he's always been a really huge source of inspiration to me. And after a few years kind of being in this world of public policy research, I was asked by him and a couple of the team to come in on a project specifically focused around meaning making, because there's some other work that I was doing at the time, this big kind of systematic literature review on mindfulness. And it was a very instrumentalized notion of mindfulness to create an ideal type of citizen. And it's just all a little bit odd. I feel like I'm being very scathing right now, but yeah. So it felt like a little bit of a homecoming in lots of different ways. So I'm very lucky and very privileged to be in this organization. And I love what we do. And I don't think I could be anywhere else just because of the different ways that we see things. And it's great because, we're a small company, but we are embedded within this much wider movement of people who bring kind of anthropology and complexity into worlds that often are quite hostile to nuance and uncertainty. So like management consultancy, companies that have very linear processes, and there's this real kind of drive and a real kind of care and commitment to thinking differently that I really admire, and it's great to be a part of.
Are there any current projects or publications that you're allowed to talk about that you would like to talk about?
I mean, there's a few in the healthcare space that are my kind of anecdotal favorites. But I think, one of my favorite pieces that we did, it was really hard. It was with, so this is with the Royal College of Nursing, so the RCN. So they're a trade union and a training body for nurses in the UK. And we were approached by a kind of long-standing member of our network, Anne McMurray, who was an incredible woman, used to be a social worker, to do a piece of work with her and the RCN to amplify the lived experience of nurses during the pandemic, so during COVID. And this was a really interesting project because it started off being a piece where they wanted to gather kind of one-off stories from nurses about what it meant to be a nurse. And it changed into, I think it's now, well, we started in 2021 and we're still going. But it was this kind of really big longitudinal piece. So we were asking nurses to share stories week by week. Because during that time, the context for healthcare professionals was shifting on almost a daily basis. They were being asked to switch roles, switch teams. No one really knew much about COVID itself. People's lives were at risk. Healthcare professionals' lives were at risk. It was a really, really heightened moment in time. And lots of people were kind of wanting to do research with nurses to understand what was stressing them out. But the findings were just coming out too late to do anything about it because the whole earth had just shifted underneath their feet within the however many months. So this was a really wonderful piece because we worked very closely with the senior leadership team at RCM. And I think every month we would go through the stories with them. And it was interesting because a lot of research at that time bypassed the usual structures. For good and for worse, obviously, because for every change, there's always unintended consequences. But this was just this really interesting way of seeing, within a very hierarchical system, how when we could share stories that were collected through this tool directly with very senior leaders, how small changes could be introduced quite quickly. And we kind of had a continual feedback loop on that. So it was just an incredible experience to work with a really engaged team who wanted to help those who were giving just a huge amount at that moment in time. And I can share a publication on that afterwards in case anyone's interested.
Yeah, and I always think that's important. Like when something like that happens, or a big event, natural disaster, pandemics, anything like that, it's always good to talk and document what is happening to the individuals who are closest to it. Because I had a friend who was a nurse during the pandemic as well, and it was a really stressful time for her. And I feel like it's important to document because then in the next couple decades or, centuries or whatever, individuals will have that research to look back on and say, okay, well, what did they do during this time? How are they feeling? What could have been done better? And hopefully learning from whatever mistakes were made during that time so that when the next time this happens, if and when, we'll be a little bit better prepared for a situation like that and how to support those individuals who are closest to whatever event is happening.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. You've really nailed it because it's that learning element, isn't it? And I think like for me, this is the real power of working with narrative, with story as research, because it's like, if I think back to Nora Bateson, Gregory Bateson, and that idea of creating a kind of learning ecology, because we're always learning in, ways that are known to us and ways that aren't. And, we tried our best in this project to feed that back in. So alongside having these monthly meetings, we had workshops where we shared the stories and that output with groups of nurses from kind of different roles across different systems. And we asked them to kind of reflect on their experiences and also what they were reading. And it was just it was really difficult and really, it felt like this kind of full circle was needed because when you ask someone to share something intimate, like a story about something that's happened to them, you want to know that there's some good that's going to come from that, especially when it's a heightened story, when something important and potentially painful has happened. So it was that kind of trying to feed this back in as much as possible so that it, ideally when we're working with our tools in general or teaching other people to, we're trying to make this a non-extractive process. and seeing how we can kind of embed this back in. So I think, yeah, the learning element and like who's learning and how and what comes of it is so important.
Yeah. You had talked a little bit about going into grad school and the university that you had attended. Do you have any advice for prospective students? I know the advice you'll probably have is for UK students, but in general, do you have any advice? Any individuals who are looking to go into grad school, whether it's here in the US or anywhere in the world, honestly?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, do your research because, and well, I guess first of all, it's like centering in on what kind of makes you feel alive. Like, what is it you want to get out of this experience that you're gonna put your energy, your time, your money into? Because it's so expensive now to go into grad school and higher education. I think, when I was going through that initial process, I just emailed a bunch of unis. I looked at every uni that had an anthropology department. I had a system, I had a spreadsheet, but I emailed lots of people and I judged it, because you can get a lot of information on the curriculum, which is great, but there's something in the interactional space that you might have with that institution that I feel is really important. And I think, I was studying a little while ago now, but I think looking back, and I think a lot has changed in this time too, because academia can be an interesting place to be in. I think if you are the kind of person that might be a little bit sensitive or struggle with social anxiety, which I'm going to put my hand up. There's a reason I'm saying this. I am, I think it's great to understand, what are the values of that institution in relation to its student? How is it going to support you, your well-being, your flourishing? And I think it's figuring out what makes you feel alive in terms of the curriculum, the content, and what is going to make you as a human feel really at home here. And considering that when you're going into this place.
Yeah, because it's also a very big, it takes up a lot of time depending on what kind of program you're in. Like my husband's program, it took him a year and a half or 2 years, I believe, for his mechanical engineering master's. But I have a friend who's getting a master's/PhD, and she's been doing that since, oh God, like 2019, and she still has a couple years left on it. And I'm like, I could never. It's too much school for me. But it's you definitely have to think about how much time is this going to take you? How much money is this going to cost you? And will it be worth it in the end? Because you have to look at the costs, the pros and cons of going into a grad program is the job that you want. Does it require a master's degree? Can you get away with a bachelor's degree? Or is it something that you want to get into academia, which generally requires a master's or a PhD? Are you willing to spend all this time and all this money in getting these degrees? So you have to make sure it's worth it in getting these degrees.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. And I think the world is shifting in that as well, isn't it? It's never too late to do a master's. There isn't that like linear trajectory now. So I'm applying for a PhD now and I'm 35 and I took 10 years to even think about this. Because yeah, too much academia. I need to go out and be in the real world, right? It's really important. And I think that is just the beauty of anthropology, because there are so many transferable, applicable, needed skills that you can take in so many different places. I have friends who went from our masters to working in a funeral parlor, to working in business. There's no end to what you can do. And I always love doing a little Facebook stalk of people I studied with who maybe I don't keep in touch with anymore, to see what they're up to now, because it's always just so varied.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, has obtaining an anthropology degree broadened your viewpoints and perspectives on the world?
Yes. I don't see how it can't. I think it's such a multifaceted subject, and it's just, if you just like enjoy people watching, like it can expect. It's this beautiful paradox, isn't it? Anthropology, because it brings together the macro and the micro. So you can take a glass and write essays on a glass, because you're seeing this object in all of that beautiful, rich context, like tracing it back genealogically, understanding how it's used, the modes of production. So there's just really no ends to this subject. And I think because it's about, a lot of anthropology is about power dynamics and positionality, you really do have to step outside of what you know the world to be, and also have humility that you can't necessarily do that some ways as well. And I think, yeah, there's a really beautiful, you might have come across Gillian Tett, an anthropologist. Yeah, yeah. So she writes about this beautifully, doesn't she? Because she talks about, the power of the subject for engendering empathy. And I think, and how needed that is. So yeah, absolutely. It's broadened my view of the world. It's made it a million times bigger. Yeah.
Amazing. So, for someone who is interested in getting into kind of the career path that you were on, what salary expectations should they have for a position like this? And I know it's going to be different because you're in the UK, but for all our UK listeners, what could they expect to make in a career path like yours?
Oh gosh, this is where I'm going to betray the fact that I never look into these kind of things. But I think, like, if you're coming out, certainly from my experience, having a master's does give you a bit more of an edge in terms of your employability if you want to go into something that is research applied or other. Not necessarily always. And again, I do think the world is probably quite different to how it was 8, 9 years ago when I came into this job, or 12 years ago when I came into my other one. But from memory, when I kind of first started out, I started in a research intern role. And I think that was it was either 16 or 18,000 a year, which is like nothing now. That was the intern. Then it went up. Actually, after that, it went up by quite a lot to like 22, 24,000. And then it kind of builds up from there. But this is where it's quite helpful to look at job sites for your particular country, because you start to get a view of the patterns, because like academia has a certain pattern because there's clearly defined roles. Whereas I think when you go out into business or other organizations, it's quite diverse, it seems to be. But yeah, that was my experience of the kind of starting. And I think, yeah, where we have brought people into our organization as interns, I think we started probably about that secondary mark, so around 24, something like that. But yeah, it's really varied. So worth looking at kind of job description sites.
Yeah, and that's something I always recommend to individuals who are either applying for jobs or just kind of browsing is look up whatever position that you are wanting to get and see what each of those companies were offering. If they're all offering kind of in the same range, it's like, okay, this is what I can maybe ask for. Because a lot of companies now, they're like, oh, what are your salary expectations? And I'm like, I don't want to answer that until you give me a range because I can be projecting so low compared to what you're willing to pay. And you're like, oh, yeah, no, we can pay you that. And be like, wait, why are you answering so quickly?
And I think especially for women, right? I had a friend recently, and she's a journalist, and someone did that to her. And she said to her what felt like a really high amount. And they were like, oh, yeah, easy. And then she thought, oh, damn. Like, I wish I'd say, it's hard. It's difficult. Yeah. But there's so many like social cultural norms around how you even have those conversations, right? But it's important too. So I love that you're advising people in that way and encouraging them, because it's very easy to ask for less than your worth or due. And I think especially when you're starting out, a lot of employers can really take advantage of that. So
Yeah.
no.
Because they'd rather pay the individual who's like, oh, yeah, I'll do this job for 30K, whereas they have this other be like, oh, no, I'm worth 50. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to go with this person over here and hope that they don't notice that I could have paid them more. So, yeah, job hunting is just brutal. Like I've been, even though I currently have a job, I am looking for a new one because I'm moving. And it's just every time you apply for a different job, they say like, oh, you should tailor your resume to the job. I'm like, you know how much time and effort that takes for just to get like an automatic rejection like within an hour? I'm like, no. It's so, but at the same time, you're like, maybe I'm getting rejected because I'm not tailoring my resume. But eh, I don't know. It's double sword with job hunting. But what do you do about it?
I mean, so much of it is done by AI now, is my understanding as well. And but this is the thing. But this is, not that I want to bring everything back to how great anthropology is, but like, when you're applying across different contexts as well, you kind of have to learn the language of legitimacy, don't you? When I've written CVs, one sentence could look 6 different ways depending on who that's going to, and it's really hard, and it can feel like a bit of a game. And I think it can definitely, because of the gaming, it can spark a bit of imposter syndrome sometimes too. So, yeah, good luck.
Thanks. Well, is there anything we haven't discussed today that you'd like to talk about before we get into our final questions?
Ooh, I don't think so, no. Are there any questions you want to ask me?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I guess for any of our UK listeners, are there any events or like research or training that your company might have coming up that individuals might be interested in?
Mm. So we offer a whole host of training. We have kind of specific methods, and we're actually developing. It's a bit of a funny little word, but we're calling it a methods marathon, where it's going to be a real kind of deep dive into the type of facilitation that we offer through a few different methods that you might want to use. So this is designed for people working in organizations, but equally people who are doing more kind of participatory forms of research. So this will be starting around the spring this year. And a big focus of this, and indeed all of our trainings, is kind of bridging theory around complexity and anthropology into practice. So it's very, very kind of peer-led as a training space. Lots of conversations, lots of potentials to kind of apply this in your settings and then bring back the learning. So I can share some information around that. If anyone is interested in the tool that I mentioned, the story survey tool, I can share an article and a little video on that. And we have trainings in how to develop your own sites using that are up and coming as well. But our trainings are very broad. They're designed to, work for anyone, regardless of your kind of educational achievements. So there's lots of inroads in. We also have a number of events that we run within our kind of network, our Kinevin network. So we often have guest speakers coming in and talking about certain case studies, projects that they've run, or we might take a deeper dive into kind of concepts. So, what does complexity theory mean for humans as opposed to in computers or biology, because they're completely different spaces. So yeah, I can share a couple of links with you. And if anyone's interested, have a little look for our website and see if anything kind of comes alive to you in that. And yeah, feel free to get in touch.
Perfect. Now, what's the best piece of advice that you could offer to someone who's interested in your field?
Reach out to people, make connections, ask people questions, and don't worry if you don't know the answer to something or if something feels a little bit uncertain. The best thing that you can do is have a conversation and see where that takes you. And I just, yeah, as I said at the start, it's my favorite part of this job. I think, when you are looking to make a shift, like I'm doing now with this PhD, the more conversations with new people you can have, the better, because you learn together. And I think there's something really wonderful about finding kind of role models or people who inspire you in the space that you want to move into as well. And, just always know if you go into a conversation like that, they learn as much from you and your perspective and your questions as you'll learn from them. So it's always really valuable for everyone involved.
Yeah, there's this podcaster. Her name is Allie Ward, and she has a podcast called Ologies. And her motto in every episode is ask smart people dumb questions. Because you can learn so much. Like, don't be afraid to ask her dumb questions because they might not see it as a dumb question because they just want to talk about what they do. So, yeah.
100%. And also there's something around, when you're in a very academic space and people speak sometimes in this language that is just so, asking someone, and I think it can be a really beautiful opportunity for someone to reflect on communication and how they share something and making that accessible to you. So yeah, definitely. And something that my dad has always shared with me is the kind of power of intergenerational learning. So like, if a new person comes into an organization, they're going to see completely different things to what someone who's been there all their life is going to see. Both of those perspectives are valid. Like, make space for the new and the novel, because that's going to show you things that you are so deep in that you'll never be able to see yourself. So yeah. And I love that podcast. She's great.
It's amazing. Like, I think it was one of my top 3 podcasts that I listened to this year because there's just so many fun facts that you learn from each episode. Like, I could listen to an episode on eggs and be like, wow, this was actually really cool. Whereas, like, in normal days, I'm like, I'm not going to do research on eggs and learn the facts. But she makes it so fun that you're like, yeah, let's learn about eggs today.
Yeah. Yeah. No, she's great.
She is. What changes do you wish to see in the industry that you work in?
Yeah, I love this question. And in some ways it's challenging because we span so many in my job. But I think the thing that comes through for me, if I wanted to give a specific context of, funding bids, funding streams, like, I would love to just see those be a little bit more open to smaller organizations and collaborations between smaller organizations. And I think, again, it's shifting. But more often than not, it's the same big voices that come through. And I was lucky enough to work on a project with Women's Refugee Commission and Plan International recently, who are really big names, where they purposely made space for that. And it was great. But that's something that comes through. And I think another thing that to me feels quite general for the more academic spaces is, there is just such a feedback, outcome-based targets culture coming through, make publications, and it's just becoming so gameable. I really hope this doesn't continue. I have friends who are working in the space. All their students are AI and making their reports from AI because they just need to get them out. And it's a weird politicized space. And when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to become a good measure, to steal from Marion Strathern. And it's such a wonderful privilege to be in academia and to have that kind of creative space for learning. And I think let's not commoditize everything. Let's not capitalize everything. So, yeah.
Now, what do you just absolutely love about your job and the industry that you work in?
First of all, the team of women that I work with, we all have like very different backgrounds and kind of different perspectives on things. And we've worked together for a long time. And I feel very grateful to, not everyone can call their colleagues friends, which I think is great. And the broader network of people that we work with. I think, like I said earlier, there's such a kind of care in everyone that I come across in terms of what it is that they're putting out into the world. So the people. Let's say that. Okay. The people.
Yeah. The people are always the best part. They make a miserable job less miserable till you can find a new one. Well, I guess finally, where can listeners learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah, so our website, the Cynefin Company, if you pop that into Google, it's Cynefin. Everyone always mispronounces it as Cynefin, but Cynefin. My Welsh ancestors will be happy with that. I've got a couple of podcasts that I've spoken on in a bit kind of more detail about our methods and tools. If anyone wants to learn about that, I can share links with you. So King Business Art is one that I spoke on recently. And I think probably our website is a good place to start. There's lots of blogs on there too, so you can kind of hear from everyone in the organization.
Awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for being willing to chat with me and talking about all the stuff that you do and love. I had a great time talking with you, and I'm excited to release your episode.
Thank you so much for the invite, Abby.
You have a great rest of your day.
All right, darling. You too. Have a lovely weekend. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of AnthroPuzzled. This show is produced by me and is distributed in collaboration with the American Anthropological Association. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website, Leah Akers for the incredible logo design, and to AnthroPuzzled's intern Fiona for the episode descriptions. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound and Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letsinger@anthropuzzled.com or as AnthroPuzzled on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Until next time.